David Sorota drops by. Okay. David, of course, from The Lever, which is a good name, by the way, because you got to use your leverage. You got to find a lever. I like it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thinking ahead as usual. Okay. So thinking strategically is.
Thank you.
So, David, let's start nice and easy. What do we think of the convention?
I have so many thoughts about it. It's like are we allowed to curse on this? No. Okay. It's a real mess. I think the thing to take away from this convention is like there's so many contradictions at an event like this, right? Like you've got rank and file people who are the grassroots of the party. You've got labor unions, then you've got corporations, you've got politicians. And my takeaway from this is there are so many contradictions that the Democratic Party would like to be true and like to not be contradictions, but they are fundamentally contradictions. And I think it always I've been to a lot of these conventions. They always raise the question of basically which side is this party on? Because you have so many conflicting interests at a convention like this who all feel comfortable, which one way to look at that, if you're a positive person, is that's a utopia. Another way to look at it is that it's a dystopia, that something's got to give, that the folks in the corporate suites that ring the arena have different interests, and their interests are fundamentally at odds with the other people who are here. Like the people on the floor, the rank and file folks in the party have different interests than the people up top looking down.
Yeah, so first of all, you guys are kind of famous for being the dystopia camp.
I really appreciate you, David, because sometimes I wonder, am I too cynical? Am I too negative? I feel a little bit alone sometimes, especially at an event like this, where there's obviously a lot of excitement. It's very celebratory, but I just have this nagging feeling that keeps dragging me back down to reality, which is, the corporate suites, the refusal to even allow a Palestinian American delegate to speak. Yep. All of those issues are still there. And I'm just going to come out and say it, even though there are some things that make me believe maybe the proposals that we're hearing, the economic populist proposals we're hearing from Harris might be something she fights for. We've been burned so many times. We've been to similar conventions where we've heard all of the flowery speeches where they're promising all these flowery things and then they don't fight for it. They always find some BS excuse for why they can't accomplish it. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I think one question is who's the next rotating villain? Exactly. I've been asking that a lot. Like who are they going to make into the next rotating villain? Because I was covering this. I went to an event with senators. Press conference with them, and I asked a bunch of them, there's all these proposals being made. How are you going to actually execute them if you, for instance, don't get rid of the filibuster?
Exactly.
And the answer we got, the first answer was, first we have to win, so it's all academic, which is technically true. But they also said, well, Sinema and Manchin were the big problems. So my question, I skip ahead and say, okay, well, who are the next Sinema and Manchin? They're already starting to think about that. And I think it's a really important question because I do think there is an opportunity here where the party, Kamala Harris, the speakers, the lawmakers are sounding a good game.
Yeah, they always do.
And then how do you hold them to what they are saying? And there's been a lot of talk about, is the party going to retrench back to Obamaism? And I think a lot of people define Obamaism in a lot of different ways. The way I define it is make big, explicit, expansive promises, and then come up with reasons why you can't deliver on those promises and say that we just need to hope eternally that those promises will become real. And my hope is that we're in a fool me once situation, fool me twice, shame on us.
Yeah.
That I hope a lot of folks have learned that there's the promise and then there's the delivery. And the delivery is what's important.
Yeah, I mean, fool me once, can't get fooled again.
As we learned from W. Okay, so David, I'm completely optimistic in general in life, and
You are.
and I always look towards, okay, yes, but then what's the next answer? What's the next answer? We keep trying and trying until we knock the door down, right? And but at the same time, I'm very realistic. I don't go around going, oh, I bet that they don't care about the donors. I bet it's all different now, right? So, but here, so I all the things you guys just said, I would have said about every Democratic convention of my life, right? So now, though, this one does feel a little different. And so I've never said that before. So like some people will say, oh, this is the most important election of our lifetimes, but they say that every time, but not me. I said Obama and Romney was not that important in an election. Clinton Dole was not that important in an election. They both would have largely done the same economic bills, right? So in this case, it is an important election, and all of a sudden, there's a tiny bit of hope breaking out. Tim Walz gets picked. Populist economic agenda is announced. Her advisors, from Phil Gordon on foreign policy to Deese on economic policy, are really good advisors. Here we have seen outreach to progressives, including Nina Turner, that is a bit shocking, right? So I haven't seen any of these. I haven't seen too many of these before, let alone all of them together, all of them in 3 weeks. So do you sense that this time, not that, is it definitely different, but maybe there's a chance it's different?
I certainly think there's a chance that it's different. Absolutely. Look, I think that Joe Biden delivered a lot of economic policies that I did not expect. And I think it was logical not to expect them. I mean, if you looked back on Joe Biden's career, he was not really a particularly progressive guy.
No,
and I think that the situation around him changed to put him in a better direction. I think Joe Biden actually only has one outstanding skill. And I'm not trying to rip on Joe Biden, but I've said this before, I'll say it again. Joe Biden, throughout his career, has known exactly where the center of his party is. And by changing the center of the party, that is why there has been a better FTC. That is why there has been a better CFPB. That is why there was a much better stimulus than under Obama. And the child tax credit, like those are real accomplishments. And if you're gonna give credit, you give credit to Joe Biden for knowing where the center of the party is. But the bigger credit is the work that was done to move that center. Now, I think Kamala Harris will probably has an inkling to reflect that. Let me find where the center of my party is. Here's my concern with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has been a very articulate messenger for big progressive policies. Where she has problems is that the minute the pushback comes, she has in the past tended to stumble. We did a story at The Lever about how she gave probably the most articulate answer I've ever heard about Medicare for all in 2019 in a CNN interview when she ran for president. It was fantastic. And then over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, she backed off, stumbled around, and her campaign kind of collapsed, in part because I think a lot of the public saw that she had trouble handling the pushback. So she's going out now and saying, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. When she's president, she'll hopefully say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But when she's president, the real pushback will start. She'll have to deal with the Senate. She'll have to deal with the House. She'll have to deal with donors. She'll have to deal with lobbyists. What happens then? And I think there's a reason to hope a good outcome will happen. But if you're asking me what my concern is, it would be, we don't know how she's going to handle it.
Well, what would be your guess? So here, let's play a fun guessing game. Okay.
Sure.
So in my estimation, Obama did about 5% of his agenda. Biden did about 15%.
Well, I think the question is, how much of his agenda did he try to do?
Well, yeah, those are two different questions, right? Because Biden, for example, was like, public option. I'm definitely going to do it.
Okay, I didn't even mention.
Never even mentioned it, never proposed it, never anything, right? And then there's things like $15 minimum wage. Oh, we're going to put that in there. Oh, we're taking that out immediately. Day one.
Exactly.
Day one. Out, right? And then there's the ones that he pretend, oh, voting rights. Boy, I really care about voting rights. Oh, golly gee, we couldn't get past the filibuster and the parliamentarian.
Immediately, they didn't even fight for that.
Right. So like we've seen all those movies before. She's going to do some version of that on a big chunk of it. The question is what chunk, right? So 5% for Obama, in my opinion, 15% for Biden. Does she get all the way up to 25% or does she go backwards? What do you think happens?
You know, I think at this point, she probably does the Venn diagram of what she's promised and what will embarrass the Republicans the most and what there may be some Republican support for. So for instance, I guess I wouldn't bet, I don't bet or make predictions, but I guess I would say I would not be surprised if the first thing Kamala Harris does is, for instance, the child tax credit.
Yes, I agree.
Right, like Republicans have said they support it. It's wildly popular. Like, boom, do it. I think some kind of paid family leave. That's my real hope because Tim Walz has said that he was asked days before he was put on the ticket, what would be the one thing you would do if you're Democrats and you win the election? He said, paid family and medical leave. Wildly popular. Now, is there any Republican, like legislative Republican support for that? I don't know, but it's a good fight to have. So my hope is they pick out issues like that are wildly popular, wildly necessary, and that can either find some Republican support or shame some Republicans into supporting it.
Okay, I have a prediction. You ready? You don't do predictions.
Yeah, I don't do predictions.
Okay. So first of all, paid family leave is the most logical one. I've been pushing for it for about a year. And it's a layup, 74% of Republican voters agree, right? So the reason that now I believe they are unlikely to do it because they didn't put it in their economic proposals.
I know.
So there's a huge red flag. Wait, that's so easy. That should be first. And Walz said it should be first, but yet it's not in the package, right?
That's suspicious.
Yeah, that's definitely suspicious. Secondly, child tax credit does cost a decent amount of money, and business interests are going to push back on it, right? And they're going to say, oh, well, that's going to drive up inflation, blah, 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 right? And it doesn't go to them at all. My prediction is they're going to do medical debt relief first, because that also helps corporations. And that goes to your Venn diagram point.
That's possible.
Anything that helps a donor, but also help American citizens. Okay, now we got a deal. By the way, like look at Biden's proposals. It's 80% things that help donors and then also happens to help the population a little bit. Like infrastructure bill, all goes to companies that are donors, labor that's donors, etc. But we do get both roads and bridges and internet.
Yes. Now, let's be clear. That's better than, I think, the first 2 years of Obama, which was what can we first and foremost do for donors, regardless of what happens to everybody else. I think there was a lot of that in Obama. So, I mean, we're getting old now, right? Like I'm 48. I think you're a little older than me.
No, much younger.
I mean, you're much younger. But like, how long do we have to wait, right? I mean, I will say the needle has definitely moved. The problem is it's not moving fast enough based on what we need to do. And we're not even talking about climate change, which the needle clearly isn't moving fast enough in terms of policy to deal with that. I mean, it's kind of, I did the movie Don't Look Up. That's what that movie was all about. And that's a terrifying thing. How do we speed up the pace of change? Pace of positive change. Like think about it this way. How, like you said they haven't put in paid medical leave. How is it the year 2024 and we're still like, maybe they'll talk about paid medical leave? Like how is that like at one level it's like, good, well, we're talking about it now. You're like, it's 2024.
Yeah, and look, honestly, I don't think the Democratic Party even has the luxury to play these games anymore. I mean, we all know that what paved the way for someone like Donald Trump to rise to power was how Obama handled these issues when he was in office.
Yes.
And the cynicism that the two of us are feeling is cynicism that I think a lot of American voters feel. I mean, the largest block of eligible voters don't vote at all. And it's because they don't believe that our political system or our politicians will ever do anything to make their lives better. So look, I get that incrementalism has been viewed as like the pragmatic approach, but I don't think the Democrats even have the luxury to make that argument anymore. And I do think that, the contradictions that you talk about are very much real. And so far, what we've experienced with the Democratic Party is, the contradiction of the corporate money, being funneled into the party is what pulls the party toward not really doing much for us.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, on so many of these issues, you can't placate the donor class and the working class. That while the Venn diagram, while the Democrats would love a Venn diagram that does that all the time, ultimately a lot of these decisions are zero sum.
Right.
You're either taxing the wealthy and using additional resources to build the social safety net, or you're doing tax cuts for the wealthy, right? That's zero sum. The money is either here or it's there. You're either regulating the company to make sure it doesn't pollute and poison people, or you're letting the company save on cleanup costs and compliance costs, and everyone's getting sick and being poisoned. These are like the Democrats now really showing my age. I remember the age of, it was the DLC, the third way, which is, I guess, commonly called neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Neoliberalism posits that everybody can win. But in a lot of these things, everybody can't win, right? Like the corporate CEO doesn't get to win when the working class is winning. The corporate CEO has to give back a little bit, or be forced to give back a little bit in the form of wages or benefits and the like. These are zero-sum games. And I think the Democrats, understandably, at a politician level, they don't want to admit anything is zero-sum. Because if you're a politician trying to get elected, you need money to get elected, but you also need to show voters that you're doing things. And so you're caught in between this tension. And so you understand why the politicians want to say that there always is a third way. But if we're being real, there mostly isn't a third way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about just quickly is Kamala Harris has put out some like kind of nebulous proposals for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to debate whether the proposals make sense, first of all, but also whether or not they're realistic proposals that can get accomplished. One of the examples, and I think this is what frustrates me, is she said something about taxing unrealized gains. And I understand the motivation behind that, because you have someone like Elon Musk who never realizes the gains, right? Never sells the stocks and never pays taxes as a result, and takes out loans to do the spending that he needs to do. But taxing unrealized gains could potentially cripple the economy, right? And so, I mean, is she just saying things that sound good, or is she saying things that she's serious about?
I think that's the $64 trillion question with Kamala Harris. I think that's the big question. It is completely unanswered in this election. It will not be answered in this election. And I think it will determine if she wins her presidency. The thing that I worry about, I look at history a lot, because history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, as the old saying goes. And beyond worrying about who's going to win the election, I've been focused a lot on 1976. The 1976 election, I'm sort of shorthanding this, but Jimmy Carter ran for president, in many ways deliberately being vague about what he would do. That was part of his strategy. And Jimmy Carter eked out an election. And Jimmy Carter, one way to look at it is that because he campaigned so vaguely, his administration was directionless. It did not have a mandate. And what ended up happening was a person who was very not vague, who was very clear about what they wanted to do, came in and had notched a historic, landmark, country-shaping, world-shaping election in 1980. So now people may be listening and say, well, at least Jimmy Carter won. And hey, at least if Kamala Harris wins, she'll have stopped Trump. And I grant that's a big deal. But looking a little bit further out, what does a vague campaign create a mandate for? And if it creates a mandate for nothing, and it creates a sense of directionlessness, that creates long-term peril. I mean, I think a lot about Josh Hawley. Is Josh Hawley, as in one example, Is he the Reagan in that story of 1980? Right? Like game it out, right?
Right.
Run a vague campaign, a fun. Jimmy Carter was a happy campaigner, sunny, right? A very vague policy agenda like this convention, wins, directionless administration. Then comes an ideologue who's serious and smart. And there goes the 1980s, right? Like that's a
really
real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
That's the thing I fear.
Yeah. I hear you guys, although I do think that this is a little bit more direction than we've gotten in other campaigns.
Yes.
Right? She did put out policy proposals. No, they're not like, the entire bill, right?
Yeah, and it's a weird it's a weird situation. The incumbent left. I mean, I think it's a little ridiculous that I've heard of this. You want her to put out policy. She's only been the candidate for a month. It's like, yeah, but she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Right. Like,
but that goes to the core of it here, right? There's two cores here. One is politicians are actors, right? So Ronald Reagan was a literal actor, but they're all actors, right? So when I talk to people in the establishment Democratic side, and I say Josh Hawley, because you and I think so alike, right? I think Josh Hawley's rising populist on the right.
Yeah, he's a good actor.
Yeah, and he's smart, so he's not an idiot.
Meaning he's not a good person, not a good politician. He is an effective actor.
Exactly, right? And so I'm worried about it, right?
Yeah.
And the establishment goes, Josh Hawley, no, he's totally irrelevant. Like they don't see him coming at all, right? The minute Josh Hawley said, I'm not taking corporate PAC money anymore, I was like, uh-oh.
Right,
okay.
This guy gets it.
Yeah, and so, so number one, they're all actors, so.
By the way, this clip is gonna be taken out of context to make it seem like you and I support Josh.
Of course, that's what they always do.
To be very clear, I do not support Josh Hawley. I think that he has skills, political skills, that he understands where all of this is going and is trying to position himself to take advantage of it.
Which means you understand the threat.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about.
So, look, bad faith actors do that nonstop.
Fair
and that's the establishment Democrats. And then unfortunately, good people are misled by that. So when we warn you about Josh Hawley, they'll say, oh, so you're supporting him. Well, if you can't do logic, I can't help you, right? So, and by the way, that's exactly what happened in 2016. I warned about Trump. I said he actually can win. And they're like, oh, so you like
so you're a supporter of Trump.
Okay, all right. So now, all right, let's get to the most core issue, which is, look, there's two different tracks here. There's the incrementalist track, which the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party believes in. They're like, hey, no, you guys are too worried. 5%, 15, 25, and eventually we'll get to 75, 85%, and eventually we'll get all these bills, right? And you guys are being unreasonable. What were they supposed to do? They have to deal with the donors. You can't win without the donors. And what were they supposed to do on this, that, and the other thing? So that's why. The other thought is, no, incrementalism leads you down a cul-de-sac, okay? It's a dead end. You never actually get there. You never actually get to the 85%. I mean, at this pace, to your earlier point, we'll get there 200 years from now, right? But the point is that we're never actually going to get there, right? And our school of thought is, no, it's the money in politics. And you're doing a really interesting podcast on this. And so if you don't knock out the money in politics, you're forever fighting over 10%, right? If you knock out the money in politics, all of a sudden the dam breaks. Look, you get rid of money in politics, I can get you Medicare for all. Not anything absurd, but within a couple of years, right? You pass paid family leave, you pass child tax credit, the country loves it. $15 minimum wage, we keep going. And the country's like, oh my God, I have higher wages, I have healthcare, some degree, we expand Social Security, you're building up love, power, poll numbers, etc. And then we can get you Medicare for all in 2 years because there's no logic in not having Medicare for all. None, zero, right? So the only thing that's blocking it is money in politics. So are the incrementalists wastes? And that goes to the core of this election because they're saying, no, we're gonna get you excellent incrementalism here. And I'm beginning to believe them that we might get up to 25%. So I don't think that they're like full of crap on that. And I think it is different than the others who are like, I'm gonna give you hope and change and smiles and pleasant feelings, and I ain't gonna give you anything, right? So, but is that, even if they give us the 25%, is that still fundamentally the wrong direction? Does that never actually get us to the ultimate goals that we need?
I mean, I think it depends on what that 25% is, right? I mean, I think let's go back to paid family and medical leave. It's not Medicare for all. It's, I don't know if I'd call it incremental, but it's like kind of like, how could it be 2024 and we're still just talking about this? It's like the least you should do. But it's also, if we had paid family and medical leave as a national standard, that's a game changer for people's lives. That's something crystal clear that people can understand. And by the way, I think that's another part of politics that we haven't talked about, which is that the Democrats typically in our lifetime haven't put forward policies that are easy to understand how they help people direct. Okay, let's use the ACA. The ACA is this wildly complex morass of some regulations, some subsidies. Like, I bet people listening, can you name what the ACA is? Like,
I'll do it right now. It was developed by the Heritage Foundation, the same people behind Project 2025, which the Democratic Party is currently fear-mongering.
But I'm saying in your life, the ACA did this for me. Probably pre-existing conditions. Okay, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like, it kind of subsidized another exchange. It's a very complicated. My hope is that we're moving into an era now where what the Democratic Party starts putting forward is so easy to understand. So again, paid family leave. If you didn't have it and now you have it, and you have competent politicians, that's a big if, by the way, competent politicians communicating what you didn't have and what you now have, that's something that can be burned in as a legacy of the party. When people used to hang pictures of FDR in their houses, it wasn't just worshiping FDR. It was, that's the guy who gave me Social Security, right? Yeah. That's why people would, your grandparents would hang pictures of FDR, right? Like, that's the kind of thing I think the Democrats need to look to, which is to say, not means tested, not complicated, not so targeted. We're talking about universal, easy to communicate things. And I'm trying to think, like, can I name one that the Democratic Party has passed? Pre-existing conditions, that's one. Okay, so like I don't have to worry, get insurance. I don't have to worry about pre-existing conditions. I got to worry about everything else. I got to be worried about medical bankruptcy and the surprise billing and whatever. But pre-existing conditions, I don't have to worry about. Okay, one thing, right? But those things should be bigger.
Yeah. So let me say two really important things here. So number one is, guys, the incrementalism for the majority of the Democratic Party, they think that that's the correct road, and we're eventually going to get all of these things through time, right? My theory on incrementalism is, no, it's just a release valve so that we don't revolt, right? Like, sure. Pre-existing conditions is the perfect example, because people were about to revolt.
Yes.
Like, they're like, well, okay, we all have pre-existing conditions. None of us can get healthcare. We're literally dying all across the country, right? And the establishment realized, release valve. Otherwise, this thing's gonna blow.
Yeah. Right.
So let's give them a tiny little bit so they get placated and they go back to sleep, right? So, but nevertheless, it's a good thing. I'm glad we got rid of pre-existing condition policies, right? So, as we were talking here, I came to the conclusion that there is a litmus test for Kamala Harris if we're lucky enough for her to win, right? And it's paid family leave. And I'll tell you why. So, in terms of people pushing for it systematically, honestly, there's only 4 people in the country that I know. I'm sure there are others, but that I know of that have been talking about it for a long time. The 3 of us, okay? But hold on, the other guy is Tim Walz.
Yes.
Okay, and now he's the vice president, and he said we should do it first, and he already got it passed in Minnesota. Okay, so
can I interrupt for 1 sec? Not only did he get it passed in Minnesota, it exists in some other states. So we're talking about a policy that has proven to be not insane and workable, proven to be like easy to do.
And effective, and people are relieved, and they appreciate it, et cetera. So if and it's at 84% in popularity, 74% of Republicans, okay? So if they don't do that one, especially given that Tim Walz is in the building, the call is coming from inside the house, the White House, right?
Totally.
And he's already shown you how to do it. It's so easy, right? If they don't do paid family leave, they never meant anything.
I think I would only asterisk it with paid family leave or something as big.
And obvious.
Big, obvious, simple, easy to understand, straightforward to do. Like, I don't know what those other things would be.
Yeah, I got another one. I mean, this is way harder, but because of the entrenched interest and the overwhelming amount of money. Ban private equity from buying residential homes. Layup, enormously popular. The American people would rejoice.
Yep.
Housing prices would start to edge down over time. It's such a colossal win. And then the Republicans are forced to defend Wall Street.
But it's more complicated as a policy. The reason paid family leave is so obvious is because everybody can understand what it's doing for them in their lives immediately.
Yeah.
Right. Like I get sick, I don't lose my job and go bankrupt.
Yeah, and look, guys, last thing. There's so many layups, right? And we could argue over around the edges, but $15 minimum wage, so much of the country already has $15 minimum wage, to your point.
That's right.
Like California didn't blow up when we went to 15, now we're at 16.
Red flag, Kamala Harris, red flag on that. That's a big red flag, is that she would not commit to a number that she supports of a minimum wage, which you get 15, 20, whatever. Okay, I don't think there's a debate. Like it should be at least $15. Like the fact, I guess the red flag is if you're still messing around with like, I don't want to give a clear answer on the minimum wage. Like that's a red flag about decision making, about, I mean, like that's the kind of red flag I'm like, man, that's really easy to be able to answer.
Yeah.
Like come up with an answer.
Right.
All right, so everybody check out The Lever. David, of course, was a speechwriter for Bernie Sanders in his presidential campaign. He also co-wrote Don't Look Up. And tell everybody what the new podcast is, because it's terrific.
Yeah, thank you. It's called Master Plan. I hope everyone checks it out. It's masterplanpodcast.com. It is a 2-year, we've taken 2 years to report this out. It is the secret story of how corruption was legalized in America. Never before seen documents that will blow your mind, I promise.
And we'll talk more about it with David on another show as well. All right, David, thank you so much.
Thanks to both of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below, because that makes you a member, and members allow us to be independent, honest. We could be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence, and that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.